All right, that leads to our program today. Excited to bring, Travis Gibson, Simon Taylor, and Mark to the panel. We'll probably have a panel discussion. Simon's going to moderate. Simon, as you know, he's been our president and the past president, works in a cybersecurity organization. He's going to be grilling us with a lot of questions because, and again, like I said, cloud readiness, cloud strategy, huge topic, big umbrella of topics. We will try and pare it down to the next 40 minutes of conversation. We'll take Q&As. If you have any questions, just chat with us and ask us questions. But we're kind of going into the notion of what is working, what is not working, what have you seen? And like I said, it is a big topic, so I'll let Simon drive this, and excited for the next phase. Thank you.
Hey folks, so while we're gathering, just want to commend Dr. Dan and the ASU guys. Very nice to meet you. And so we've established two things already. One is that Alexandra is good in the sort of heat of the moment, right? She got thrown straight in, right? She thought she had another half hour, so that's a great aspect right there. And Nathan, he said he was working in cybersecurity and he was honored to be given the position of TA. Now, I work in cybersecurity. TA in my world means threat actor. So I didn't know ASU was that edgy, actually, Dr. Dan, but you actually teach people to be threat actors. That's pretty cool. Right, so you've met the folks already. Obviously, you know Bipin, Mark Wysomierski. He's my good friend from Avnet, and Travis is also my good friend from Make-A-Wish. So I thought what we'd do for tonight's session is we don't want to make this a theoretical, discussion about cloud. I'm really interested about these guys' actual experience in working with a cloud environment, right? And quite frankly, a lot of it's pretty good, bad, and ugly, frankly, right? It's not as pristine as you may think. So let's just kick it off by a very simple. By the way, I love this graphic. So right. And this actually is very good for the first question, because we've sort of had this term cloud for a few years. Don't worry, Kathy. But the reality is, cloud means many things to many people, right? Yeah, it means many things to many people, and it's not a single thing, right? So I'm going to ask the panel members what cloud means to them, and quite importantly, what it means to their organization. What does the organization think cloud means, right? I'm going to start with Mark.
It's like asking, what is IT, quite honestly, right? It's anything, right? I'm an infrastructure guy. So from an infrastructure perspective, it's in somebody else's data center, right? And that's what you want to do. But in order to be able to justify you moving into somebody else's data center, they've got to give you all kinds of compelling reasons why they want to do that. And so all different types of tool sets, all different types of enhancements, all these grand ideas of being able to grow almost infinitely with as much compute and storage as you could ever want. But every story is different. And even though, Avnet, if you don't know, we're now celebrating our 100th anniversary. We just had actually the celebration today. And you think about that, it's crazy, right? And I've been there for 22 years of that, so it just shows I'm old. But ultimately, when you have that type of situation, it has to grow organically. And that's exactly what happened with Avnet. You had a situation where somebody's like, we want this application. Well, that's sitting in the cloud. Now we need to be able to have systems that are going to help support that. And somebody pulls out a credit card. And it's no different than any other company. It just happens with more concerns because you've got more at risk potentially. So from our perspective, my team got involved because there was somebody who had put a system out there that was actually, somebody was trying to hack it. And first of all, why did you put RDP with a public-facing IP address, right? Right.
Let's
so
not go down that rabbit hole.
So that happens, right? And so next thing you know, we need to start putting governance around it, and that's exactly what happened. And it's just grown from there. And now to the point where Now every Wednesday, I'm in charge of the governance meeting. And so it is, and it is wonderful in the fact that cloud can grow to whatever you can possibly think of it, right? It's almost, it's a blank sheet of paper and you can take new things to it. So it's wonderful in that respect, but it's also scary in that respect. And it's just like anything else. Computers, when they first came out, right? The first PCs, same thing when it came to virtualization. You heard about virtualization sprawl. Look at all these things you could do. Cloud is just yet another one of those.
So for those who don't know what RDP is, which you should all know what RDP is, right? Remote Desktop Protocol, Microsoft's wonderful way of hacking computers, which is why we renamed it last year as the Ransomware Delivery Protocol. I cannot tell you how many incidents we did based on RDP, right? Open RDPs. Quickest way to get people connected. So Travis, tell us about what cloud means to you and what does it mean to Make-A-Wish? Yeah.
So like Mark said, cloud is essentially using somebody else's compute and storage to provide IT services to your customers, whether those customers are your corporate customers or your retail customers, consumers, etc. Quick story, Make-A-Wish is made up of 60 different organizations that roll up to one larger organization. So Make-A-Wish has been in the cloud for over 10 years as far as those chapters are concerned. And by that I mean the national office has had a co-location lease. We've bought hardware, storage, etc. We've hosted their CRM and financial applications, and we've done that for over 10 years. Private cloud, we'll call that. Yeah, we'll call that private cloud. Now, as we move into the next generation of cloud, right, even the national office wants to go to the cloud. We want to get rid of some of our IT constraints and liabilities. And we're starting to use infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and of course SaaS. And we're moving our CRM and our financial applications to SaaS platforms. We're moving our on-prem custom apps to PaaS and IaaS platforms wherever possible. And for Make-A-Wish, that specifically means Azure, AWS, and our own co-location space.
Very good. And actually, we'll touch on those kind of topics before. Now, for the man who's been CIO at Rogers for weeks, you must know everything about Rogers. And more importantly, you must know everything about DuPont, who's obviously a global company. So tell us a bit about what the cloud means to those organizations.
Absolutely. It's funny because I walk in and the first day somebody gives me the tour of Rogers' office here in Chandler. And lo and behold, there's a data center in the middle of the office, and it's not even high-raised bed. So I was like, whoa, we have our own on-prem data center. That sounds so archaic right now for me, who actually led some of the conversations back in, I still remember 2005 was my first, back to my consulting days, trying to sell a prominent A&D client here in the Valley, aerospace and defense, about SaaS model and IaaS models. You can go to cloud, and as Travis mentioned, yes, Make-A-Wish as part of my journey has been cloud. And I remember one of the board members asking me, "Are we on cloud?" I'm like, "Yeah, we are on cloud." It doesn't matter whose server you are in, because we don't have data centers. So as long as it is a colo, they don't care. We're on cloud. Yes, we are on cloud. So that he looked upon me very impressed, like, okay, that's good. Coming back to the Rogers story, we are on-prem. We are embarking on a notion of what we need to do with cloud. I still have flash memories of my consulting days trying to convince my manufacturing clients about putting things in cloud. A&D, aerospace and defense, talking to them about cloud was like, no way. And this is our IP data. We are not sending it to a place that we cannot understand. That was the notion at that point of time. And we've come a long way from there, but Rogers still is a mix of on-prem data. We have SaaS applications. One thing I don't like much is using an IaaS model, because it gets pretty costly with when your storage costs add up, because cloud is not cheap when you're doing a heavy lift applications. But right now, I mean, we are on a modernization journey. I would say we are on SAP S/4HANA hosted in Azure Cloud. That's going to be our big backbone, consolidating from all our ERPs, Salesforce. So we're moving to a more SaaS model, and of course Azure from a PaaS model. There are still conversations from my infrastructure director about, there's been programs running where it has to be a lift and shift. We have to be in cloud 100% because we want to get out of the data center. And I'm like, let's just hold off on that. So that's the journey we're in middle of everything that, because part of it is, one of the things that is very curious and interesting, which I was not part of in all of my life, is MES data. They do not want anywhere to go anywhere near the cloud. They want to see it. They want to see the lights blinking, because they're like, we're going to air gap it and make sure that we have it right in front of us. We don't trust it. Everything is, you can convince me about all the cloud, but I cannot have even a 30-minute or a half-hour disruption to the business from an MES perspective. So it's a really interesting notion of what cloud is to different people. Thank you.
Very good. Well, I used to work for a top global bank, and believe me, we had some tough conversations about how we were going to put stuff in the cloud, right? For the same kind of reasons. So it was very interesting listening to Bipin's comment about the C-suite or something, talking about cloud. And I wanted to ask these folks, is there an actual formal cloud strategy in your organizations? Or has it kind of just happened, or just organic? And or was it just the CEO was on a plane, read Forbes, and thought everybody else was running in the cloud, so you must run in the cloud, right? And I've seen that as a strategy. So I'm going to start with maybe Travis. Right? Do you want to? Is there a kind of underlying strategy, or are you just winging it?
So I would say it's been both for Make-A-Wish. The first couple years of our journey was driven by IT solely by itself. And we were justifying it and reselling it over and over and over again. 2 years into our journey, I think that has flipped. And today, 4 years into our journey, I will say 100% it's part of our business strategy. It's baked into every business unit's goals. And we're finally on the right track to accomplish this. We're aligning our business processes to our cloud technologies. So business is all in at this point. It did take a little bit of time, but.
So Avnet's road to the cloud has been very bumpy. We have had a long-term relationship with Microsoft, but in 2016, in that 100-year history of the company, I would venture to say that 2016 was probably the most upheaval in the company's history by far. For those of you who know anything about it, we sold 40% of our business to Tech Data. That was on the computer distribution side. But more importantly, we also rolled out a really, really bad ERP solution. And it took a long time to clean that up. There was a lot of problems. Microsoft came in and went to our CEO at the time and said, looks like you guys have got a lot of issues. What can we do to help? And no, they didn't. But I tell you, one thing that they did show that makes people raise their eyebrows is Power BI. So it turns your average person into a data analyst. And so they showed the senior executives how to be able to take something that our analytics team took 3 months to do, and they did it in the afternoon. So our CEO said, "You're hired." Next thing you know, there was a business discussion that happened, and now we have a very multi-million-dollar agreement with Microsoft, which we've now been implementing. So what we're doing in this regard is you're learning. As the CIO is like, well, why don't we just lift and shift? We've now made this agreement. We've got all of these things. This is where you have to come back and say, where's the business model? Where's the reason for it? Because of the fact that we have such a mature data center, we have been able to consolidate our costs and be able to crank things down. We've been told for years and years what to do. And so we were able to prove that in an IaaS environment, if you were going to do a direct migration into IaaS, that it was actually going to cost you money. And a lot of the things are built in, right? Because we're more of a CapEx-oriented company. So you have to wait for all those things to depreciate. You have all of these prepaid contracts that are now going to fall off. It's going to take a long time before you see that. So instead, I think that we are now taking the right approach, where we are looking to refactor applications, and we're doing it the right way. We're trying to do more PaaS, more SaaS. IaaS helps to help if you need to put a server that's going to manage some of that. And because a lot of this stuff changes so rapidly, I would say in our analytics space, for example, we have now gone to 5 different types of databases. So, and I won't go into all the details, but it just makes for, because, Microsoft, for example, comes out with all these different things, and they're like, why are you using that? You told me to use that. Now that's not the shiny tool that's going to do what you need to do. So that's the reason why I think we're going down the right path, but when they say fail fast, we're very good at failing fast.
It may take you 100 years. Anyway, sort of fast, right? So in the weeks you've been at your new place, have you divined a strategy yet? Or do you have to create it yourself?
It's going back to your previous question, Simon, whether is it a strategy versus does it happen organically? It's an interesting journey because when I was back in consulting for a very premier organization, the reality was that in order for you to get a server, it used to take 6 months. That was the reality. And so the best part about getting the projects done was just going and swiping your credit card on AWS, you get a virtual machine, and then you do the stuff. So was it part of strategy? Probably not, but the strategy of getting your projects done quicker worked. So there was definitely a benefit from a business perspective to look at it from, hey, can we move fast and get it done? Now, the strategy would have probably told you how to bolt on your security to that, the processes, compliance, and all that, which was, we all know compliance and things come later. It catches up usually as opposed to being a proactive. So from a strategy perspective at Rogers, we are taking a new look at that cloud migration. And it's interesting because cloud transformation readiness is a service right now provided by many consulting organizations. It's almost a 3 to 6 months, which did not exist before, but that's a right way to go about understanding. There should be a strategy, first of all, and there should be a conversation as opposed to what Simon mentioned about, a CEO talking to another CEO in a plane ride, or just a simple magazine flip in a business class talking about, have you taken your wares to the cloud? But I think there are much better strategic conversations happening right now because of cybersecurity, that people now are a bit scared of just jumping to the cloud, like what used to happen 10 years back about swiping a credit card and getting a VM allocated. It's much better right now. It is definitely following a strategic vision, and now people are making the decision, I think, as leaders, that no, let me hold on to IA, using cloud as an infrastructure as a service. Is there any past models that I can leverage, the workloads better in a better fashion? Legacy applications need to be rewritten. That'll take time, recode it, but can we do it the right way? There is definitely conversations.
I wanted to add one quick thing. One thing that I think cloud does do is allow for you to not have to spend so much time in planning. In other words, right now, if a big project were to come up, you have to include the infrastructure, the hardware, the depreciation, the financing, whatever you're going to do. With the cloud, you try it. If it doesn't work, you rip it up, and you haven't spent any of that money. So that's where the real benefit, as long as you develop those processes that don't allow, we're going to probably talk about this a little bit, more rogue IT.
Okay, I'm actually going to skip a question because we were going to ask a question about how IT policy standards and governance has changed, but I think you've already mentioned a bit of that, and it is interesting that we even see business units spinning up their own IT because it's so simple, right? It's a swipe of a credit card, right? And that may be a bit of rogue IT, but that also introduces security. And I did want to give plenty of time to talk about this. So, we've all heard the horror stories of open S3 buckets. In fact, we just had a client today. We discovered they had an open A3 bucket, or Elasticsearch databases being open. And it's the sort of dirty little secret with Office 365 is that when it comes out of the box, it's very insecure, actually, right? So I do want to ask the panel, and obviously we're going to start with Travis because it's definitely his core skill area here, though. So, what are the security and compliance implications of actually running into the cloud?
So from a security perspective, we're all used to network traffic flowing through our security stack. Well, that doesn't happen anymore with the cloud. People go directly to the cloud. So the first thing we have to consider is how do we move our security stack to the edge of the cloud? And that's when new tools come into play, like secure web gateways, cloud access security brokers, and of course, identity and access management. As you move to the cloud, the new perimeter becomes the identity, which I'm sure you've all heard that before. And your new corporate network is now the internet. So protecting the identity and protecting the data now becomes the priority versus the old firewall perimeter protection. And as it relates to, second part of the question was compliance. So moving to the cloud also means shared services and understanding shared responsibility. Who's responsible for what portion of security? With IaaS, you might be responsible for infrastructure still. With PaaS, you're simply responsible for code and data. So understanding those shared services, where your team comes into play, where the vendor comes into play, and also shared responsibilities even internally with IT teams.
Let's mix it up. Let's give it a bit.
Yeah, you bet.
I will tell you from a CIO perspective, the thing that we typically look at is skill levels, moving skill levels. There's a bit of a notion that moving to the cloud, you can save on a lot of resources because you don't need a network engineer. You don't need, some of the skill sets will continue to change. But one thing that we completely miss out on are the compliance details as to, what Travis mentioned, who's doing what. The RACI needs to be redrawn in that case, and we miss that piece, and that's a big item. The RACI as to who's responsible for not the same stuff because network engineer is gone, but the compliance pieces come in. And like Travis talked about, there was a bit of an education that we did for the board and the executive team to talk about when we move out, the new cloud is the internet. I mean, the new your perimeter, you have just enhanced your perimeter. Your new corporate network is the internet. And then comes in how does security follow that model and the compliance pieces that needs to be in place, which are some of the gotchas that me as a leader have gone through, not understanding the nuances of the compliance models, because that's where we get a lot of, even for SaaS models. I mean, I wasn't aware that the compliance models that needs to be in place are completely different. The interesting part is the compliance team, if you talk to them, they're still catching up to the game as to what is happening in the cloud, because cloud is really going at a much faster pace. Randomly, I mean, today we just implemented SuccessFactors. We're going there, and we were sitting and talking today about compliance model, about successful onboarding and offboarding of people. What are the controls? And the SuccessFactors lead says, "Oh, that's not in SuccessFactors." And so, okay, what is your manual control for it? Can you prove it when a person offboards? Those are things nobody had ever thought about if, when you actually do the moving. Because I always say this, when you have your own data center, fortunately or unfortunately, there is a notional, sense of security that you have, because you kind of put the layers of onion in there, firewalls, you do this, you do that. But then now you're exposed in the, like Simon mentioned about Office 365. Gosh, I mean, you got to add those layers back in the cloud model, which that is the piece that we miss. Because I don't think it is a misleading by vendors, but I think it is mostly being unaware of the gotchas of what happens when you move. So from a compliance perspective, those are much bigger, things that we have to take care of when we do that transition, if you will.
And the one thing I'll add to real quick, Simon, is just from a governance perspective, I think your number one risk in the cloud is really misconfiguration. Maybe number two, because number one might be overprivileged developers. So again, governance comes into play very seriously there.
Yeah. Did you have anything to say on that, Mark, or should we skip?
I have a lot to say on it, but that's okay.
Right, just in the interest of time. Yeah, and you consider things like GDPR. you may have guessed that I may not be American, so I'm actually European. So my data is supposed to be sacrosanct. So where is my data? If you're hosting a service for me, you need to know where my data is, right? And in a cloud, do you know where that data physically is? Because that matters, right? So I think Bipin actually just did tee up the next topic I'd like to talk about, which is actually impacts on staff, right? Or what kind of skill set do you need in the cloud world? Because it's not the same as running your own stuff, right? And that has implications both on your existing team and potentially augmenting that team. So, Mark, I'll start with you in terms of what do you think is the staff impact, and maybe what skill set do you need that maybe you didn't have before?
Yeah, it's those, especially when you have a very mature team. Most of the folks on my team have been with the company in excess of 15 years. And so they're used to a certain way of doing things. And now I said to them 5-10 years ago, embrace the cloud or it's going to embrace you. And I didn't mean that to say you're going to lose your job. It just means that your job is going to change. And that's the way that we're trying to look at it as an opportunity. And we got into it very early. So what I was able to say to my team was, we get to drive the narrative. And so that's extremely important. So, but to your point, you have to build those skills. The interesting thing is it's almost like the old days where you wanted generalists. You wanted people who understood the entire environment, build the server, build the network, understand the cabling, the underneath part of it. It's very similar with cloud because you're now responsible. You could call it a resource group, you can call it this little logical area, but ultimately that's your little area to own. And you have to take care of it. So you need to understand what that means, including whether or not you need a firewall, whether or not you can't depend necessarily. We can put obviously policies in place to put those things together. But in general, it hopefully makes people think about things more holistically and also say, wow, you guys did a whole bunch of stuff on the back end, right? To be able to make sure that we were secure. Because it's very difficult to do those types of things.
You're talking about skills?
Skills.
It's different. And, we've had really good conversations and, Mark talked about it. It's a little different as a leader, CIO coming in and, because you're switching out to the cloud, and it is very important that we take the team, if you're convinced, through the change management of the skill sets are completely different. I mean, the network engineer or a server admin would convince you that it's the same. I mean, it's going to, but it's not. And you have to, as a leader, realize it and walk them through the path of changing. You have to invest if that is the right person that you want to upskill and reskill in the many things that, and some of them may not have a place in the new world because some of it is done for you, and that's the beauty of cloud, or that's the cost structure of a cloud. And what Mark said is absolutely true. You have to embrace it. And in one way I look at it and talk to the team is we are IT and we are constantly changing too. Everything in IT keeps changing at a lightning, fast speed. And so, if from a CIO's perspective, it's a bit different than a couple of levels below where they look at it from either shape up or ship out kind of a model. And you would hate for you to lose people, good people who've been in the organization for so many years, taking care of your back, infrastructure and back end stuff. But that's a conversation. And in my in some of the cases that I've done, I can talk about Make-A-Wish a bit. We've been able to at least work with the vendors, bring in great folks who can teach our folks the systems and the technologies, and being able to change that model. But I think you have to invest in the right people. You identify who the right people are, and then make the transitions. But it's tough. It is a difficult thing. Many people discount it, and they lose people too. So.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Travis, because I think you're probably the most representative of somebody who's gone cloud native, perhaps, right? We've heard a lot about IaaS and PaaS, maybe even some SaaS, but taking your own applications, going cloud native. I think that has definitely some skill set implications.
Yeah, so I think going cloud native, re-architecting your applications, just in general, if I could just take a step back, just in general, I'm gonna go a different path from these guys real quick. So I don't think it's that hard to reskill your engineers for the cloud, actually. I don't think it's that hard. Whether you're in the cloud or on-prem, frames still go through switches in the same way. You have to understand that. Packets flow through firewalls and routers in the same way. You have to understand that. And what you need to teach your people is cloud native tools. So now they're not using Cisco CLI or VMware or Microsoft directly. They're using cloud native tools. And so some of the most important skills, especially for infrastructure folks moving to the cloud, is of course understanding the cloud native tools, but it's bash scripting and Python, because now it's infrastructure as a code. That's your most important skill set as a network or systems engineer. I actually don't have much experience with cloud native re-architecture yet.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. You now need to be doing Terraform and Ansible, right? If you're going to take your workloads and split them and go hybrid, you've now got API considerations, right? You need to know the entire flow of your application. Maybe you didn't know that because it was all in one place, right? But now you're going to disaggregate it. What are the latency sensitive parts of that, right? Because you're going to now introduce latencies maybe you didn't have before. So I think that requires a different skill. I know we've got some questions coming up, right? So I'm going to leave a little bit more time for questions. So I'm going to ask the last question. Then we'll open it up for these guys, right? So all of you have been in cloud for quite some time, okay? You've seen it all, warts and all, as we say, right? So just one or two examples of what you think are the real gotchas. Anybody who's not yet maybe that advanced in cloud or thinking about cloud, what would you pick as a kind of one or two gotchas that in your experience, right? And I'll start with you, actually. Just pass it down the line.
I would say the most important thing is moving data. So in the last 12 months, we've moved 60 terabytes of data to the cloud, and we've learned a lot of lessons in doing so. So validation and logging, change management, having your engineers' scripts peer reviewed, things like that. But moving data is probably going to be one of the major factors. I mean, like Vipin mentioned earlier, it's easy to swipe a credit card and build things in the cloud. That's not the hard part. The hard part is change management, moving data, managing users through that change.
Similar thought process, but more about if you are going to refactor an application, refactor all of the application. You can't decide, I'm going to make this cool front end that's going to now make my system that is, I've got all kinds of problems on my back end with the type of database that I have and the type of system that I'm doing, but I'm just going to make a nice looking front end to it, but all of that data is still sitting inside of my data center. It's going to be very, very poor performance, and you're not going to see the real benefits of the cloud. That's the number one thing that I've learned.
Gosh, I mean, I wish I could just stand on the rooftops and yell, "It's bloody expensive!" From a cost perspective, I mean, the first credit card swipe, cheapest, and first one is almost free. You just need your credit card information. But that's been a big gotcha for me. I mean, I don't think I'll revise anything, but as I said, we are going all in S/4HANA into Azure cloud. There's been a lot of learnings even in the last 1 month I've been there about the number of VMs that you're spinning up, and we're up to almost 220 VMs across all production and all those, and they are expensive. And so that's my biggest thing, as much as I wish I could relook at it, and we did that back in Make-A-Wish. I had Travis do an exercise to look at what would that mean for us if we did actually a CapEx model, bought all the servers and depreciated across 10 years, and what would we look like after 10 years? That I think long-term thinking is sometimes we just throw it away, but it is, one gotcha would be, it is expensive, and I'm sure it'll get cheaper by the time, as the years go by, but it is getting there.
All right, so this question is from Dr. Dan Mazzola. I'm going to go ahead and read it, but he can jump in if he needs to. So, in education, it is so easy to build a server or VPC, click, 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 but to educate on all 5, 7 layers and have students understand it, all is such a complex and overwhelming task. I struggle with the best way to prepare the workforce of the future. What advice do you have for education to approach this?
I'll probably provide a smarter answer, and I'll pass the mic on. Holy crap. I can tell you, I'm the CIO. I don't know what the 7 layers are. I think some of our education systems are totally outdated, and to match what, the syllabus and things, that needs to change, Dan.
I'm old school. I would go old school and say, learn the 7 layers. Understand what those things mean. A lot of that stuff really isn't any different. It may look like magic under the covers, but when it comes right down to it, it's still TCP/IP primarily. There's still the same issues. Yeah, you could have some sort of cloud provider thinking that they're protecting you. You have to protect yourself, and you have to understand what that means. And so you have to go back to the basics, and for somebody like Dan who's trying to teach it, I would pull out old school servers and build your own stuff, and before you decide that I'm just going to now build out a Kubernetes cluster. It doesn't make sense. You need to understand all of that.
Yeah, real quick, I would say that for me, I didn't realize how to learn until I was a little bit later into my career. So I learned through college, like most people, and learned on the job a little bit. But to be honest, when I started taking certification courses and reading certification books, I mean, they're really up to date compared to college courses. Sorry, Dan. They're really up to date. They cover a lot of the nitty-gritty details. They go really deep into the weeds on the concepts, so you get it conceptually. And then from there, of course, the certification studies, buying simulations, buy simulators, buy labs. I remember when I was first getting into network engineering like 15 years ago, I was a systems admin, but I wanted to be on the network team. And so I would stay late and I would work with the network engineers. I would configure new switches and, things like that after hours. But then I started buying switches on eBay, used switches, and I built my own network in my house. And I'm telling you, that is where my career and my knowledge just skyrocketed.
You were already my best friend, and now you're even better best friend, right? First question I ask all my interviewees for jobs: do you have a home lab? Right? If you don't have a home lab, I'm not that interested, because you are obviously not that interested. That's what it's about. And to Dan's question, learning things from first principles, I think, is critical, right? It's not magic under the covers. They need to understand at least basically what it is that all this stuff is built upon. Do we have any other questions? Yeah.
So, Dr. Dan, it sounds like the CIS department has to bring the lab back.
Yeah.
We do this pendulum swing where we go super techie and then super soft skills.
Right, exactly. Any questions from the in-person audience? Which there is, by the way. I know you can't see it, but we do actually have a fairly healthy turnout. Any questions from anybody? Yeah, just wait for the microphone, actually. And hopefully it'll get picked up if you speak loud enough into that.
So I was going to ask, have you guys changed cloud providers? Has anybody ever experienced that? What issues did you have?
That's a super good question. And by the way, do you just use one cloud? Why do you not use multi-cloud? Which, of course, anybody can opine on that? Yeah.
Well, I kind of gave you the story of how Microsoft came in, so they got their foot in the door. But we are in year 4 of a 5-year commitment, so now we're thinking about what are we going to do when we go into that space. And again, from an infrastructure space, we are, I apologize for this sounding like a commercial, but we are leaning heavily on Equinix. If you do any, because of the fact that they have what they call their cloud exchange. And I think of it, I'm sorry, I'm going old school again, Lily Tomlin, right? Connecting different networks, right? You can do that, and it's land speed to get into those environments. And this way you build up your edge to whatever cloud it is, and then you can do it. Unfortunately, here in the Valley, there isn't an Equinix site, so the closest we could get to if we wanted to was actually to go into LA. But around the world, that's our plan, to be able to do multi-cloud.
Yeah, I would say every business is going to have its own unique challenges and its own unique things to address. So one value or principle to just keep in mind is just don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? So if you're all Azure, maybe you should have backups to AWS or GCP or something like that, right?
And by the way, good luck moving 60 terabytes of data to another cloud provider, unless it's AWS and they'll send you a physical box to copy it all onto, right? So do we have any other questions from the audience or from online? It does not.
And we are at time, but I know we had some people come in late and/or we didn't get all of our guests to do introductions. Would anybody like to do an introduction to originally?
Yeah, do you want to pop up and just say hello?
Not from another chapter, if that's okay. Just invited tonight. Stand there. Okay.
Look into the camera.
Hello, everyone. I'm Denny Donofrio, ASU alum from WP Carey. So nice to see you all. And I am a PMO manager at Worldwide Technology. We do consulting. Our office is over in the Biltmore area. Invited here by Troy Curtis. So thank you for that. And very nice evening. Thank you, everyone.
Very good. Thanks.
We have one more guest?
We do. I saw you snuck in at the back. No. That's new members.
Right here. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Green, invited here by Cindy Zarlingo. I work for RGP consultancy firm here in Phoenix. I oversee the Phoenix and the Las Vegas office. So I'm here to learn more about some of our clients and some of the work that they're doing, just to be able to speak the language a little bit more. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Right. While you were all applauding, let's continue that for our fabulous panel. Bipin, Mark, and Travis. Thanks so much, guys. Really, really appreciate it. And then I'm going to pass over to you just to close it out.
All right. With that slide on Dilbar, moving on. Thank you so much. Thanks for attending. Appreciate you guys being here and being online. Taking time to listen to us. Part of the topics that you all want to listen. So appreciate you joining us for another SIM chapter event, and see you next month. Thank you.
Join the board.
Oh, and remember that event in the 9th, is it, of December?
9th of December.
Is going to talk about cloud strategy. So if you bring your own stories about your own cloud mishaps, successes, failures, fail forward.
I'll send it out.
Send to Mark. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a safe journey home. Thanks.
All right, thank you, everyone. Great job, Alex and Nathan. I hope you made some content